For most of the last 40 years, if you lived somewhere the cable companies did not reach, there was a good chance a small satellite dish on your roof connected you to the rest of the world. The company behind many of those dishes grew from almost nothing into a pay television giant serving, at its peak, more than 14 million customers. Then the ground shifted beneath it. Americans began cutting the cord, abandoning traditional television for streaming. And instead of managing a slow, graceful decline, the company made one of the boldest bets in the history of American telecom. It would spend billions to build, from scratch, a brand new national wireless network, a fourth carrier to challenge the giants. It was a spectacular gamble, and on June 30, 2026, it ended in bankruptcy court. This is the story of Dish, a company that saw the future coming, tried to leap over it, and ran out of cash mid-jump. It is a story about disruption, about debt, and about what happens when a company's survival depends on a single deal closing on time, and it doesn't. To understand the fall, you have to understand the man who built the company, because Dish was, for decades, essentially the extension of one relentless dealmaker. In the early 1980s, an entrepreneur named Charlie Ergen started a modest business selling large satellite dishes out of the back of a truck. From that beginning, he built Dish into one of the largest pay television providers in the United States. At its height, Dish served more than 14 million customers, beaming hundreds of channels to homes that cable had ignored or overcharged. Ergen earned a reputation as one of the sharpest, most aggressive strategists in the industry, a former professional card counter who ran his company like a high-stakes game, patient and calculating. He was known for his willingness to make enormous, contrarian bets, to hold positions long after others had folded, and to negotiate ferociously. In an industry of cautious incumbents, he was the gambler. For a long time, that instinct paid off. Dish was a cash machine. Satellite television, for all its limitations, printed money as long as customers kept subscribing. The scale of what he built is worth pausing on. From a truck-based dish operation, Dish grew into one of the two dominant satellite television providers in the United States, a household name reaching deep into rural and suburban America where cable lines never ran. For millions of families, Dish was not a second choice. It was the only choice, the one company willing to serve them. That reach translated into steady, enormous cash flow for years, the kind of reliable profitability that most companies can only dream of. But the business had a structural vulnerability that no amount of clever strategy could fix forever. It sold television the old way, a big bundle of channels, delivered on a fixed schedule, through the sky. And starting in the 2010s, a new way of watching arrived that made that model look ancient. Streaming changed everything. Netflix and then a flood of competitors offered viewers exactly what they wanted when they wanted it, for a fraction of the price of a full cable or satellite package. Customers began doing something that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. They canceled. The phenomenon got a name, cord cutting, and it hit satellite television especially hard. The numbers were relentless. In 2025 alone, Dish satellite service lost roughly 636,000 subscribers, ending the year with about 5.02 million, down from around 5.69 million just 12 months earlier. A business that once counted its customers in the tens of millions was now watching them leave, hundreds of thousands at a time, year after year. Charlie Ergen had seen this coming for a long time. The question was what to do about it, and his answer was breathtaking in its ambition. Rather than accept a slow decline, Ergen decided to reinvent Dish entirely, not as a television company, but as a wireless one. The plan was audacious. The United States had 3 dominant national wireless carriers. Ergen set out to build a fourth from the ground up, using a new generation of technology. To do it, he needed 2 things, airwaves and a foothold in the mobile market. For the airwaves, Dish spent years and billions of dollars accumulating a vast trove of wireless spectrum, the invisible radio frequencies over which all mobile communication travels. Spectrum is finite, valuable, and tightly controlled, and Dish amassed one of the largest private holdings in the country. For the foothold, in 2020, Dish acquired the prepaid mobile brand Boost Mobile for around $1.4 billion. Boost came with millions of existing customers and gave Dish an instant presence in the retail wireless market. The vision was to fuse these pieces into something new, a modern, software-driven 5G network that could undercut the incumbents and win over customers frustrated with their carriers. It was described as the boldest independent 5G experiment in the history of American telecom, and it came with obligations. In exchange for its spectrum, Dish had committed to federal regulators, the Federal Communications Commission, that it would deploy 5G coverage across the country by specific deadlines. So Dish began to spend. Between 2020 and 2025, the wireless side of the business poured more than $13 billion into building out infrastructure, towers, equipment, the physical bones of a national network. It was one of the most capital-intensive corporate transformations imaginable. A shrinking television company trying to fund out of its own pocket the construction of a nationwide 5G carrier. For a while, the audacity was almost inspiring. Here was a company refusing to go quietly, betting everything on becoming something new. Regulators had reserved a place in the market for a fourth national carrier, hoping more competition would lower prices for consumers, and Dish cast itself as that disruptor, the scrappy outsider that would finally break the grip of the big three. The vision had genuine merit. If it worked, it would reshape American wireless. But a vision is not a business, and a network is not customers. Building the towers was only half the challenge. The other half, persuading tens of millions of Americans to leave their existing carriers for a brand new network still under construction, was arguably harder, and Dish had committed to doing both at once, on borrowed money, against three of the most entrenched competitors in the economy. And there was a problem with betting everything. If the bet did not pay off quickly enough, there was nothing left to fall back on. The satellite business that funded the dream was itself shrinking by the year. Dish was, in effect, using the cash from a dying business to build a new one, a race between how fast the old world was ending and how fast the new one could be built. It was betting that the future would arrive before the past ran out. The wireless dream ran into hard reality on two fronts at once. The first was the market. Building a network is one thing, getting people to use it is another. Even as Dish poured billions into infrastructure, its own wireless customer base did not grow, it shrank. Boost Mobile, which had come with more than 9 million subscribers at the time of the acquisition, saw that number fall to under 7 million. The company was spending enormous sums to build a network while the customers it already had were walking out the door. The second front was the balance sheet. All of this, the spectrum, the Boost acquisition, the $13 billion build-out, was financed heavily with debt. Across its various entities, the company came to carry roughly $25 billion in obligations, and debt is patient only until it isn't. Eventually, notes come due. Interest must be paid. The clock does not stop because a strategy is taking longer than expected. By 2023, the strain was visible even in the personal fortune of the man at the center of it. Charlie Ergen's net worth, once well into the billions, had fallen below $1 billion, and analysts were openly discussing the possibility of bankruptcy. The market had begun to suspect that the great wireless gamble might not have enough time to work. Facing mounting debt and a wireless business that was consuming cash faster than it earned it, the company reached for a lifeline, and it was an enormous one. In August 2025, EchoStar, Dish parent company, agreed to sell a large portion of its precious spectrum licenses. The buyer was AT&T, one of the very giants Dish had set out to challenge, in a deal reported at around $23 billion, part of a broader set of spectrum sales valued in the tens of billions, and covering virtually every market in the country. The move followed regulatory attention from the FCC regarding the pace of Dish network build-out. It was a stunning reversal. The spectrum that was supposed to power a new empire was now being sold off to a competitor to keep the company alive. But even a lifeline that large only works if it arrives in time. Everything now depended on one thing: the AT&T deal closing and the cash arriving before the bills came due. It did not. The transaction, expected to close around the middle of 2026, was held up by what the company described as unforeseen delays, including the regulatory review that any deal of that size and importance must pass through. And while the deal sat in limbo, the calendar kept moving toward a hard, unmovable date. On July 1, 2026, a set of secured senior notes issued by Dish DBS came due. To repay them and keep operating normally, the company needed the proceeds from the AT&T spectrum sale. But that money had not yet arrived, and without it, Dish DBS simply did not have the cash to make the payment. So, on June 30, 2026, one day before the deadline, Dish DBS Corporation and its affiliates, including the wireless business, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. There was, at least, a measure of order to the collapse. This was a prepackaged bankruptcy, a filing in which the terms of the restructuring are negotiated with creditors before the case ever reaches a judge. Holders of a large majority of the company's notes had already signed on to a restructuring support agreement months earlier, signaling that the major creditors were aligned on the path forward. This was not chaos. It was a controlled demolition. But controlled or not, the symbolism was impossible to miss. A company that had set out to build the future of American wireless, that had spent more than a decade and tens of billions of dollars chasing that vision, was now in bankruptcy court, its spectrum being sold to the incumbents it had hoped to unseat, its television business still bleeding subscribers, its great gamble reduced to a set of assets and obligations to be restructured under court supervision. The dream of a fourth national carrier, built by an outsider from a satellite dish business, was over. The Dish story is not a story of fraud or villainy. Charlie Ergen was not accused of a crime. He was a builder who saw disruption coming and tried to leap over it. That is what makes the lessons here so instructive, because the failure was strategic, not criminal. The first lesson is about the danger of the all-in bet. Faced with a declining core business, Dish did not diversify cautiously or shrink gracefully. It bet the entire company on a single, enormous transformation. That kind of bet has a binary quality. If it works, it is visionary. If it fails, there is nothing to cushion the fall. The same boldness that made the strategy exciting made it fragile. A company hedges its bets precisely so that being wrong is survivable. Dish left itself no hedge. The second lesson is about debt and time. Ambition on this scale required borrowing on this scale, roughly $25 billion of it. Debt is a tool that lets you buy the future with money you don't yet have. But it comes with a schedule, and the schedule does not care about your vision. The build-out took longer than the debt allowed. When a strategy needs more time than the balance sheet will give it, the balance sheet wins. The third lesson is the most specific and the most brutal, the danger of depending on a single deal. In its final act, Dish survival came down to one transaction, the AT&T spectrum sale, closing by a particular date. When regulatory delays pushed that closing past the deadline for its debt, the entire structure gave way. It is a reminder that liquidity, simply having cash on hand when a bill is due, is not a detail. It is the difference between solvency and bankruptcy. A company can be worth tens of billions in assets and still fail on a single Tuesday because the right money was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there is a final, broader lesson about disruption itself. Dish was destroyed ultimately by cord cutting, by the same wave of technological change it had tried so hard to get ahead of. Ergen was not wrong that the old business was dying. He was not wrong that wireless was the future. He was wrong about whether one company, carrying this much debt, could fund that leap fast enough to land safely. Seeing the future clearly is not the same as surviving the trip to reach it. In the end, Dish satellite dishes are still on rooftops across the country, still pointed at the sky, still connecting the customers who remain. But the company that put them there gambled its existence on becoming something else, and discovered that the hardest part of reinventing a business is not imagining the destination. It is staying alive long enough to arrive. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. All information is sourced from publicly available court filings from the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, regulatory filings, company announcements, and credentialed news organizations. The Chapter 11 filing described is a civil bankruptcy and restructuring proceeding. This video makes no allegation of criminal wrongdoing by any individual or company. Source links are available in the description.